In Part 1, we will begin at the beginning, so to speak. We will take a bird's eye view of the history of philosophy and the big questions that have puzzled the world's greatest minds for more than 2,500 years. Lord Alfred North Whitehead famously stated that all of philosophy stands as mere footnotes to Plato. Here we can see it depicted in Raphael's School of Athens. Notice in Raphael's painting that Plato and Aristotle are at the epicenter of the painting, surrounded by numerous other figures from across the ages. Plato gestures with his right hand, pointing upward to the sky, while Aristotle gestures with his hand towards the earth. The contrast is between objects of the mind and objects of the physical world. Plato believed that the universe could be understood by simply thinking about it in a disciplined and rigorous way. He believed strictly in the existence of ideas, and that all that we experience in our day-to-day lives was a busy and noisy illusion, while Aristotle believed that investigations also had to include careful observation of the natural world. We must sometimes look up from our mathematical models at the world around us and check that our ideas are in harmony with the universe, because the universe is not obliged to care what you or I think about it. Aristotle is largely credited for distinguishing reality from what can be said about reality. Statements and claims about reality may or may not be true, but Aristotle was concerned with rigor and the validity of the statements we make. So he is largely credited for establishing formal and informal logic. It wasn't until around the period of the 16th and 17th centuries, around 2,000 years later, that philosophers began to organize into royal academies and see the importance of careful examination and analysis of nature to test their own theories. They would begin to form modern conventional wisdom. Johannes Kepler was the first astrophysicist, but was largely unknown in his lifetime. It would be almost a century before Newton would come along and understand the importance of his 3 laws of planetary motion and generalize them into his own 3 laws of motion. Kepler came from a world that took as truth the idea that Gaia, Earth, and Uranus, sky, were separate realms with each their own laws. After all, earthly things fall to earth, and non-earthly things do not. The heavens were perfect, divine, and immutable, while the earth was imperfect, transient, and mutable. It was the first multiverse hypothesis, where heavenly things remained in heaven and earthly things always fell to earth. Johannes Kepler became the first astrophysicist because he actually took seriously the uniquely accurate and precise data recorded in Tycho Brahe's journals over a 20-year period. Kepler attempted to reconcile the motions of the planets with the purely mathematical logic of Plato and Pythagoras. The problem was that Brahe's data was meticulous and so precise that neither he nor Brahe could make sense of it, unless we are willing to accept that just maybe the orbits of the planets are imperfect. Well, if this is so, Kepler thought, then there is nothing on which he could base the belief he had had for so many years. Kepler had to face the fact that his Platonic solid model was simply wrong, and he started over. So he went back to the old drawing board, to the very beginning, and spent the next 10 years between 1601 and 1610 working on a picture from the data alone. He found that the data fit perfect with very subtle elliptical orbits. He would be among the first people to shed an ancient belief about the divinity of the sky in favor of highly precise observational data. And this is why he is the father of modern astrophysics. Galileo was a contemporary of Kepler. His belief was that the heavens were knowable in earthly terms, but this was heretical because it challenged the authority of the church and state. Galileo was placed under house arrest for the remainder of his life for arguing that the heavens were knowable, but Johannes Kepler proved it. Kepler was the first person to describe the natural motions of all celestial bodies in terms of three laws that even the Earth itself obeys. In fact, we still use Kepler's laws. The history of science is a history of unifying ideas in pursuit to reduce an incomprehensible multiverse of seemingly unrelated things and events into a universe of deep interconnected relationships. Isaac Newton followed up on the work of Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler to ultimately shatter the imaginary boundary between heaven and earth and discover a universe, not a multiverse. This literally stunned Europe. He had shown that it was possible to understand the motions of the celestial spheres in the same way we can understand moving things on earth. In fact, as we shall see in this series of presentations, the history of science is a history of unifying ideas. As Plato believed, there was indeed an underlying connection linking all things, but we needed more than just logical thinking. We also needed skillful experimentation to understand it, and this will be a recurring theme as we approach the end of this series and demystify Bell's amazing discovery.